Today we are talking about I think these are pretty much some of the cheapest lenses of all time. Yeah, we've got a 25mm right here, a 35mm here, and a 50mm lens. These use the C mount, which is a screw mount for originally Super 16 cameras, but now is used on modern surveillance cameras, which are what these are. CCTV lenses meant for security cameras, but they have some interesting quirks, some fun things you can do creatively, and they're so incredibly cheap that it's almost impossible for them to not add some value to your kit. Before we jump into image quality, let's look at the build of these things. Well, first off, they are super tiny, but that's not always a great thing because they're kind of hard to operate, especially the 25mm has awful build quality, awful focus and aperture ring, but hey, at least there's a lot of blades. The 35 is the best built by far, but you know, that's not saying much, but it actually feels pretty good to, you know, use the aperture and focus ring on this one, and they have little rubber grips, which is nice. The 50mm is back to the weirdly bad build quality, and even the aperture ring is like backwards, so it goes the wrong way. It's a mess. It's a mess. But when it comes to the actual handling of these lenses, it's a pretty terrible experience. Just getting the lenses adapted in the first place and figuring out the flange distance and if it'll focus to infinity or not is kind of just a guessing game, although most of these lenses do come included with a C-mount to micro four thirds mount adapters. Once you get the adapter, you have to screw these lenses in and out, so if I were you, I would get 3 adapters, or at least like 1 adapter per lens. But hey, we're not getting these for the build quality, we're getting them for the character. Speaking of, let's check out that image quality. So looking at the 25mm, we've got okay sharpness in the middle, but it rapidly falls off towards the edges. This lens definitely worked a little bit better in the GH4 days when the 4K had a little bit extra crop, but I mean, this is part of the effect you want to get. Like we saw in some of the test images, this can really draw your eye to the center of your frame, but the problem is you're really only going to have a center of your frame. So middle is okay, corners are abysmal. Anything but the direct center is god-awful. Stopping down to f4, you know, we've got a lot better sharpness in the middle, a little bit better darkness in the corners. It's being pushed at least into the very corners, although the very corners are like basically black. But honestly, those edges have not really gotten much better going down to f4. They're better, but not as much as you would think. And if you stop it all the way down, you actually see a giant circle around the edge, and I mean, the image quality is good, and what you can see from the corners is decent, but yeah, it's clear that this lens was not really designed to fit a micro four thirds sized sensor, and so you may want to crop to get better results, or you may just want to embrace the quirks of this lens. Moving on to the 35mm, we're going to find pretty similar story. Decent center sharpness that falls off towards the corners, although fall off is a lot more gradual, and you can see sharpness in the middle areas a little bit better, but those corners are still about as blurry as you'll ever find due to the image circle not just being quite big enough. Going down to f4 on this lens, like honestly, I barely see a difference. It's still pretty bad. And then going down all the way to f16 or whatever it is, you actually are getting acceptable image quality more or less. The 50mm definitely is the haziest, you know, just across the frame, but it's also the most consistent across the frame in my opinion. Going down to f4 sharpens up the center, but that's about it. It removes a little bit of that haziness. And then 16, everything's a little bit sharper, but there's some diffraction as well. So as we probably could have guessed, the sharpness is abysmal, god-awful for all these lenses, but we're not really buying these lenses for the sharpness anyway, so we'll give it a little bit of a pass, I guess. These lenses also have really unique but also kind of problematic lens flares. So the 25mm, the biggest flare element is this glaring flare that sort of goes off to the side here as it gets to the corners of the frame. It can look pretty nice, but it can mess with your contrast a little bit too. That's definitely for sure. Stopping down for all these lenses improves that a little bit, but the glass is so low quality that it doesn't look great either way. The 35mm has this big ring that kind of blooms out towards the edge, and in general, this one I think is the worst for the contrast. And there's also this little burst towards the edges because the plastic of the hood actually reflects the light at pretty much any possible angle at any intensity. And the 50mm has a similar rainbow ring and a little bit of a blue jellyfish vibe going on here. And of course we've got another burst towards the edge as well. With the lens flares, you gotta really be careful. These things can wash out your entire image and make it really difficult to recover, especially in video. In photography, you can kind of use the dehazer in Lightroom, but yeah, it's tough. So be careful of the flares. Like the character, hate the Leica contrast. If we look at the bokeh here on the 25mm, we get the coveted swirl, and that vignetting, the darkness in the corners, the swirl, it all is bringing us into our subject, which is a very cool look, and it's really hard to beat that effect and get that effect on other lenses. So while the center is okay, while 75% of this shot is out of focus, that swirl, the darkness, it really brings you into the subject, and I think it looks actually super cool. And yeah, in reality, look, the center is totally fine, I think, for most things. I wanted to get a similar shot with the 35mm just to show the difference in the bokeh here, and again, you can see the 35mm has a little bit more detail, stretching out a little bit further than the 25mm. The bokeh on this lens is weird. Instead of being like the sharp, jagged edges, we've got a little bit more of a round bean sort of shape. And it also definitely has that soap bubble effect that you see on certain lenses. This isn't the best scenario for it, but there are some examples of that soap bubble look. So, if you want the swirly look, the 25mm is the way to go. But if you are a soap bubble kind of person, which I know a lot of y'all are, this is definitely a nice lens for you. And then switching to the 50mm, we kind of get both. We've got highlighted edges on the inside of bokeh. We've got very hazy kind of bokeh going on. But there is a bit of a swirl for sure on the 50mm, even if it's not apparent in this situation. But hey, the 50mm did give me this really cool close-up kind of shot, so you can see that detail is just a little bit hazy, but not bad, even wide open. And on these lenses, you get a lot of these little V exit kind of weird, bokeh, ghosty things, like in the flowers on the hair and stuff. So yeah, weirdness going on all over, but the 50mm, it's got something to it. I'm not gonna knock it. I do like that you can get so many different looks out of these lenses. You got swirly, soap bubble, and smudgy kind of bokeh, I suppose. But if you're trying to use this as a set in a production or a film or a music video, they don't match quite as well as you might want them to. So what is the deal with these lenses overall? What are my final thoughts? I think that, just like I said in the beginning, they're so cheap that there's almost no excuse not to get them and try them out. If you do short films, narrative stuff, music videos, and you're not afraid of being made fun of, then I think these lenses can provide a lot of value. If you're doing more serious professional stuff, you definitely, these do not look the part. They are not up to snuff for any professional work. So that's one thing to keep in mind as well, that you're really gonna look kind of silly using these lenses on any professional, semi-professional thing. Unless these are people you trust and you have worked with before, these things look super silly. So that's one part to keep in mind. The looks do matter, and if you have a GH3 with a tiny little lens like this at a professional level, it's gonna raise some questions, but the results kind of speak for themselves. They're super quirky and weird for dream sequences or anything that looks dreamy or ethereal. There can be some really fun stuff to be had there. Otherwise, these really are in that toy camp for me. They are toys to provide a unique look, like a lens baby or a prism filter or something along those lines, and not much else. So yeah, if you're looking for some weird stuff, a way to put a unique spin on things, or just have 25 to 50 bucks you don't need, a few of these lenses might be worth investing in. Otherwise, if you're looking for just a fast lens, there's way better stuff from Seven Artisans or Mikey or anything along those lines that you might rather pick up, other than these super cheap ones. You go up to $100 or $150, there's stuff that's on this level but has better build quality, or has just better optics in general. So anyway, those are my thoughts on these kind of classic lenses if you're coming up in the GH4, GH5 days, but not sure if anybody really talks about them anymore. So I just wanted to give my thoughts on these lenses I've used on a few projects here and there. So anyway, thanks for stopping by, guys. I'll see you in the next video.